Right. We don't have projecting slides, so we have a laptop, but you all have printouts for now. So we'll use that. So I'm going to sit so you can see us. This is really meant to be more like a conversation. So I'll introduce us. I'm Heather Bout, Bob Braun. We're both on the school committee. Since it's a small group, do you mind? Can we just introduce ourselves? Let me know your name, and if you have any school or group affiliation in town, great. If not, great.
Started on the left, I guess.
Yeah.
Chris Shanley. I'm parents of twin second graders at Alcott.
Oh,
We live on the other side of town.
Okay.
Side Avenue.
Yep.
Off Lexington.
Okay, great. And this could potentially affect you if it goes through.
Oh, yeah.
I'm Andy Smith. I'm an architect here in town. I
Oh,
work at
good.
Concord Center, and I have 2 kids over at Thoreau Elementary.
Oh, great.
One in second grade and in kindergarten.
Perfect.
So
Okay, good.
figured by the time this thing moves
Yes,
forward,
hopefully this is going to affect them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In
several years.
back here.
Jim Richardson. I've got a 3rd grader at Alcott and 2 high schoolers.
Oh,
Who both
wow.
went through this building.
Yes, I'm sure. Okay, so you have the experience already.
June Davenport, 2 kids at Willard, first and third.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'm Michael Drake. I have 2 children, one of whom's in first grade at Alcott, and the other's too young. So,
But very relevant for this.
And I'm Chris Pope. My kids have aged out.
But he is on our facilities planning committee, which you'll hear about because we've been doing a lot of work on these buildings. So Chris is well versed in this discussion also. Or at least the facilities part of it. I don't know if you've heard all of it.
Peabody.
You did,
Yeah.
right.
Except for that, and I'm not
Other personal experience here. I love it. I know, I have a bunch of friends who said, oh yeah, I went to the schools and they were talking about replacing them then.
Yeah.
So it's been a while since then. So I guess what we'll do is you each have a printout, so let's just use those. I probably won't even use mine much, but I'll kind of open it up. So I'm only gonna get on Wi-Fi. Let me just introduce first, kind of, the goal here is to share out the conversations and planning that have happened so far about a new middle school, talk about what's recommended to go forward. A lot of the discussion in terms of the slides that we have are about the financial piece of this, because that's where most people have a lot of questions. But I can kind of go into whatever everybody wants to hear about more. So I will start off and do the high level, but it's a small group, this is a conversation. So interrupt me, ask questions as we go, don't wait until the end. Just want to kind of take everyone through it all. So sorry, give me a second here. I'm going to open up to where you guys are. Does it help if I face this out, or you're all looking at it anyway, so it doesn't matter. Okay. Sorry, Mark, we're going, but with nothing up there. Okay, so to start off, the overview of where we are is it is kind of a time-sensitive discussion, actually. So these buildings, as you know if you've gone through them, are at the end of their lifespan. Come on in, more people coming in? Come on up front. Oh, okay.
When were they built?
So I'm gonna get to that. But in the 1960s.
Well, they're buildings.
Yes, exactly. So we've applied for state funding a couple times and not gotten it. We think that that's actually pretty unlikely at this point that we will. So we're recommending moving forward with the feasibility study and design to go it alone, basically, to do this on our own. So Article 14 of town meeting this April is what we're really talking about right now, and this is the 3rd slide here. It requests $1.5 million to cover 3 things: a feasibility study, a schematic design, which for those of you who aren't architects in the room, is your basic high-level design that puts a price tag on the building, an estimated price tag. It's not the detailed design that you're going to give to a builder with all of the specs of every room inside, but it's kind of your general high-level building concept with a price estimate that goes along with it. And also hiring what's known as an OPM, or the owner's project manager, who then oversees the process throughout from there moving forward. So that's what we're requesting funding for. We're not asking for money for an entire building yet. In order to get all those details, we obviously have to do the work that leads up to it. A couple of caveats: we have not designed the building. We don't know exactly how much it will be. So all of the numbers that we're going to go through are really estimates based on the best possible information that we have, current building costs and escalation and all that. But they're all estimates and placeholders for now. So it's using the best information that we can until we actually do this feasibility study and design to move forward. So things we'll go through: building histories and facilities planning as it's happened so far, current conditions of the building, the process, the costs, and what actually becomes the cost of waiting. So quickly on the buildings, they are both about 50 years old or a little older. Sanborn, sorry, that's me. Sanborn was built in, it opened in 1964 as a junior high, so it was just 7th and 8th at that point. That's where we are now. Peabody was designed in 1968 as an open concept elementary school. So it's had to be retrofitted ever since. But by the time it was ready to open in 1970, it was actually opened instead. It was never opened as an elementary school. It was opened instead as overflow for the middle school, and it's operated that way since. So this was never a design to have 2 middle school buildings. It was overflow, and we've continued that way. You'll see some investments over the timeline. The only real investments over the past 15 years have been new boilers and water heaters, which were in 2014 and 15, which just had to be replaced in order to keep the buildings going. Hi, come on in.
Can I just get a copy of the slide presentation?
Yeah, we're kind of out of them. Could a couple people
That's
share?
okay.
Sorry.
I can stay for like 10 minutes anyway. So
Oh, okay. If you can add your name and email to here, I will email it to you.
okay, that'd be
We were
wonderful.
supposed to have the slides up on the screen and they're not actually working. If you can sit near someone and share for now, that would be great. If you only have 10 minutes, is there any one big question that you want to get out of this?
No, it's a feasibility study. It's not the actual money for the funding.
Right,
So
we're
that's
only-
the key thing.
Exactly. That's
1.5 million.
right now it's 1.5 million for feasibility study and a schematic design. So that I want to be clear about that because people will look at it initially and say $1.5 million is a lot for a feasibility study, which it would be, but it's actually that, the design and the project manager.
And the money would come from.
So it's an excluded debt for the town. So the town would take out a debt. It has to pass by a 2/3 vote at town meeting on April 8th, and then also at the polls. So there will be an election, a special election following that, in order for it to pass because it's over $1 million excluded debt. Sure, no problem.
That was really nice. Thank you.
Anytime. So let's see, those are the buildings. What else was I going to say? That's about it. Other than overflow, that here at Sanborn we've had to add the mods, as we call them, the modular buildings outside over the past, again, about 15 years, just to accommodate the numbers. So timeline kind of goes through that same thing, but really since 2014, what have we been doing? Couple of replacements here, opened the high school and then got focused on this building. Although the thinking at some point was that we could keep these buildings going for a while if we continued to invest in them. We wanted to make sure before investing that actually made sense. So in 2016, we created the Facilities Planning Committee, and you'll see more about that actually moving forward. If we go right to the next slide. Facilities Planning Committee.
Question,
Oh yeah.
is Sanborn roughly twice the size of Peabody?
No, not quite. So when we reconfigure next year we're gonna have
Right.
7th and 8th here and 6th over there. It's gonna be a little tight. We're having to do some moving around. In terms of square footage exactly, I don't know actually. In terms of students, there are more students here right now, but it will be a bigger difference as of next year. We're having to move some kind of general space that was used here over there and reconfigure a bit to make it happen.
Sanborn, 84,000 square feet.
Oh, thank you.
56
There we go. It was right on my slide.
on that slide, yeah.
A piece of it I didn't know by heart.
I didn't either. In students, it's about the same too, I think.
Students, right now, it's more like it's 400 something here, about
60.
409, and about 326 at Peabody right now. So total's a little over 700, there are more here. So the Facilities Planning Committee, created in 2016, it was 15 members, a combination of volunteer community members, administrators, school committee members, teachers. It met regularly, but primarily hired an architectural firm, Feingold Alexander, to conduct a facilities study. Different from feasibility, it's really the detailed study of the existing buildings, with the goal of answering 3 primary questions that we asked them. 1, what would it take to remain in these buildings for another 10 years? Basically, could we put this off for a little while? And then 2 and 3, what would it look like to renovate or rebuild? So we did a whole study on that, and what came out, if you look at the next slide, next couple slides are basically their findings. So current conditions, they basically told us that Peabody and Sanborn are both deteriorated and obsolete, that they have been well maintained, and they were actually pretty impressed by what we've done to keep them going, but they're just at the end of their lifespan. If you look at construction methods from the 1960s, that's just the way buildings tend to be now that were built in the 60s. They have about a 50-year lifespan, and that's about all you get out of them. The 10-year outlook was really important for us to look at because it's a big question in town when you look at the various things that need to be done. But they came back and went through in a detailed way what would need to be done in each building to keep them going in a viable way, to really provide a viable education for another 10 years. And the estimate was at least $34 million. And that was in 2017 dollars. So basically, as a facilities planning committee and then as a school committee, we really looked at that and said, none of us feel comfortable standing up and asking the town for $34 million to invest in buildings that we would then have to rebuild after 10 years. So that we, I don't want to say dismissed, but dismissed relatively quickly after analysis. It didn't take that all that much. So then we look at the options that they went through. If you look at the slide with the bar graphs and the 5 options there. Again, wanted to look at everything from staying in the buildings to what would you do to them, because we really need to answer the question, do we need to do something? So they also projected out, if we wanted to make these buildings last for another 50 years, could we? Yes, we could. Their projection, though, was that it would take about $68 million, 67.9. This is all in 2017 dollars. So it escalates since then. However, the estimate for a new building at that point was also $68 million. So again, you can do your analysis pretty quickly, and if we're gonna spend a chunk of money, whether it's 68 and it's now gonna be more, than we're talking about 2019 dollars, putting it all into the existing buildings didn't make any sense when you could build a new one for the same price. So then there are the options in the middle. Options 1 and 2 were renovating the existing Sanborn building. Option 1 was just adding a new classroom wing, and that was not recommended by the architects. They recommended against it because it really wouldn't provide us all that we need in what we want to provide education in Concord. Things like bringing teams of classrooms together, grade level teams together, being able to do some collaboration, all that kind of stuff. In this building, just adding classrooms didn't really address many of the goals we're talking about. Option 2 was significantly renovate. It would keep just this auditorium and the gym and then redo the rest of it. That was considered a viable option, as was their third, which was building new. 3A and 3B there are both building new. The difference is that 3A was to the MSBA spec. MSBA is the Mass School Building Authority, which gives reimbursements, but they have a lot of pretty strict regulations on what they reimburse for. They do not include an auditorium in a middle school. They don't include a regulation-sized gymnasium, a bunch of other restrictions. So that was kind of for reference, but it's not likely a plan that Concord would actually move forward with. 3B is a more likely scenario of a building that's designed to actually meet the needs of the community, and their estimate there, again, was about $68 million in those dollars, and that was considered their other viable option. So they came back with either significantly renovating or constructing new. Now, when we went through those, there's certainly a comparison process here, and the facilities planning and the school committees both came back and said, for the difference in price that you're talking about, that there are so many advantages to building a new building over renovating this one that we came back and recommended build new. Biggest advantages are both the huge risk that you take on in renovating a building from the 1960s with asbestos and mercury and all kinds of contaminants in it, that as soon as you start to renovate and do any work on it, there's huge remediation that can need to be done. Now, some of that is provided for in the estimate, but we also know that in cases like this, once you get in there, those costs can just mushroom. You also have to get the kids all out of the building to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of costs that go along with that, as well as inconvenience, and things that are long-term, like you've now got parts of a building that are not gonna be as energy efficient as they could. They're still gonna need maintenance. They're still just not up to date like the rest of the building would be. So we're recommending new building.
So they would try to keep kids in this school while they're building?
Yes, so the recommendation is actually to build new on the fields here. So because we have these fields right here at Sanborn, perfect flat space for building. So we would design a school that would go on the fields, build it while these two schools are in session. Then when it's ready to open, move all the kids in. Then you do demolition of this and create your new fields and parking and everything.
Was the cost estimate of the new facility, does that include the demolition and remediation of this site?
It does, and this is not the actual cost estimate. We can get to that because this was
The
from 2
$90
years
million.
ago. Exactly. So that includes demolition, yes. Yes.
And Peabody, we might as well mention,
Yes.
would go back to town operation. I mean, the town owns it now. They all, obviously, all the elementary and middle schools. But the school administration wouldn't need that building anymore, so the town can decide what they want to do with it, you know. And there's, 7 acres of land there?
Yep, 7 point something, and there are a lot of uses that have been suggested for it in town. Everything
8
from
acres.
8, yeah, it's like 7.8 or something, almost 8 acres. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
8.
Basically 8. Anything from affordable housing to office space to recreation space to selling it off and creating a stabilization fund to help pay for the new building. So there are a lot of suggestions out there. That's not something that we're delving into because we basically will surplus it back to the town and it's a town decision. But we know that there's value that we offer back to the town just in offering back that building. So onto the conditions of this building. There's first to start with operational inefficiency. Really operating 2 buildings just in and of itself is a complete waste of money and time. We spend over $500,000 every year just in operational redundancies. It's a combination of utilities and staffing, really. I mean, you have extra 2 offices you're running, all the extra utilities, extra principal or assistant principal, you've got all kinds of extra staffing and utilities. So those are savings that we would see on an ongoing basis once we combine in one building. The infrastructure itself is outdated everywhere. Most of it is all original, from heating lines, many of which are buried in concrete. So if something goes, you literally have to dig into the concrete to try to address issues. Some of the systems have been failing this year. This year alone in Sanborn here, we've had pipes burst in the science wing. We've had septic backup in the hallway. So some of these are getting to the point of failure and we're patching as we go, but they're risky. Then you have equipment. Obviously a lot of the equipment is aging. It's stuff that we don't want to replace unless we absolutely have to.
Are there any legal things to worry about?
No, we're all in legal compliance. I mean, unless there are things that are grandfathered in, we are absolutely in compliance legally with everything that we have to do. ADA compliance, equipment-wise and everything like that. There's certainly stuff that's grandfathered in. For instance, if we were to start doing work on this building, we would all of a sudden kick in further ADA compliance needs and other things like that.
Fire suppression.
Fire suppression, all of that kind of stuff.
That's correct. And in general, codes are, have advanced quite a bit, obviously, in the last 40 years or so. So anything new would have to be built according to code.
Yeah. So a lot of times, this really comes to play when things break down and we have to fix or replace. Replacing things in an old building is never what you want to do, but parts are often not available for the systems that we have just because they're so old. So it's just a constant ongoing issue. There is overcrowding in both buildings, really. We've got the mods here to keep things running. We've actually turned a custodial closet here into a learning space. And over at Peabody, you've got this congested area that's cafeteria / lockers. That's really a big hallway, but it's what we use as cafeteria and lockers. So there's certainly overcrowding. Jump in anytime. Anything
You're doing fine. I mean,
Okay.
Educational shortcomings. Clearly, these buildings were built when completely different educational philosophies were prevalent and thought of to be important, and we're now, needless to say, into our 21st century, and there's so much that's changed in the educational approaches. STEAM is one thing, everybody knows what that is, right?
Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math.
There you go. But also, combining a couple of classes, English and history sometimes, or other interdisciplinary situations are just much more easily accomplished if you have a building that's designed for that, rather than what we have in these two buildings.
Are all those sort of, I'll call them arguments, that these buildings are efficient, are they gonna be spelled out for the town? A lot of the town members probably think that we can get by with this building.
Yeah, so we're doing a couple things. One, we're running tours every Saturday morning. So we've literally been walking people through the buildings, 9:30 at Sanborn, 11 at Peabody every Saturday. At town meeting itself, we will not have a lot of time for that, because the most you ever get for a town meeting presentation is 6 minutes. We're gonna spend probably 30 here telling you about all of this, and we have to highlight it in 6 at town meeting. So there's not a lot of time. What we will have are a slew of slides as our addendum or backup, so that as people ask questions, we pull up the slides and the photos and the stats and information that will come up. So if someone at town meeting gets up and says, "Can we just stay in these buildings for a while?" We're ready with an answer.
One comment I've heard a few times as well, my kids went through these schools 30 years ago,
Yeah.
and they're fine, they turned out pretty good,
Right.
So it's, there'll be people at town meeting who look only at the finances, and what it does to their taxes. We're not gonna change that. And then there's other people that, like myself, who, my 2 kids went through the system a few years ago. Actually, I graduated from the high school. And even though, I haven't had anyone there for 25 years, I feel that, the current taxpayers ought to help out with the educational level that's presented to the students in town.
Education maybe in the paper.
Yeah, actually, we have a commentary coming out, not this week, but next week, hopefully.
And Bob pointed out, all this stuff put on the website.
Yes.
So if people look at that, you'll get a detailed look at it.
Yeah, but we need to get in the face of people that.
We do, and
It seems like
if you,
coming right out and highlighting the cost of maintaining the
That's-
facilities
Yeah,
is almost equivalent to the cost of a new facility.
Yeah.
exactly.
And then looking at what the property value impact of not upgrading this facility is on people whose children have already exited the school.
right,
Where their house is maybe their biggest investment.
Yeah.
I mean,
property value is
probably everybody
huge.
here, maybe we'll stay in Concord, in middle school, maybe not. I don't know.
Right,
But it seems like those are two compelling arguments.
Absolutely.
And they need to be
And
front
trying
and
to
center.
keep it going for 10 years.
Well, it's,
yeah.
Silly.
Yeah, exactly.
What we do need is for people to be communicating that and spreading the word. So I will, if it's okay with all of you, follow up with you now that I have your emails after this and send you kind of our hit points, the information. And if you can help spread the word, that's great. We would love for everybody to, send it to 20 people who can send it to 20 people. And just make sure that we spread the word about what's really going on and why we're asking for this. This isn't about, we really want a fancy new box to put our education in. It's about enabling the education that we should be providing. And that's important. And there's a financial case for it, which we're gonna get into. It's even more than we could be saving money on the maintenance. It starts to be, it costs us more every year to wait. And so it's actually, from my standpoint, the only financially responsible thing to do is to move forward now with this feasibility study and design and get going, or we're just gonna spend more money.
So Heather, you might mention how much outreach has taken place, because, the League of Women Voters,
Yeah.
we had a couple of meetings with them, and, special groups,
Yeah, we're doing a lot of outreach. We're having obviously a lot of these sessions. And we've had everything from groups this size like you guys to groups of 20 people. We've also been out, like Bob said, with the League of Women Voters has held a couple of informational events. We've presented there. That gets a lot of the people who are concerned about the price tag so that we can really engage and have that conversation about why this is important now. it is a tax burden, and we understand that and don't want to minimize it. At the same time, it's necessary. Something has to be done. So we're reaching out as much as we can, having those conversations. A lot of parents are starting to kind of reach out and spread the word also. So agreed, we're doing everything we can to get the word out here. And any further input is certainly welcome. So in terms of where we are, I almost skipped over process before we get to project costs. Just briefly, our process with the MSBA so far. The MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, does give partial reimbursement to towns for building projects. It is based on a town's wealth factor, so it's not, in our case, excuse me, it wouldn't be a large percentage necessarily. We'll get into what that is, but we've applied 2 years in a row and been turned down. We actually feel that the likelihood of us getting funding from the MSBA is very low. There are several reasons for this. One, acceptance rates are low and have been declining each year for the past few years. Bunch of reasons behind that. Partially just that construction cost is growing much faster than available funds. There are districts that have been out there, applying for 7 years in a row, 10 years, 11, and getting turned down every year. You could be waiting a long time if you wait for them. And also, Concord has had MSBA support in the past. They've supported 3 schools for us already. And to put this delicately, the last time that we were involved with them was a bit of a tumultuous experience. For anybody who was in town and followed it, or if you hadn't, basically there was a lot of questioning about the process that went on, and the MSBA suspended funding in the middle of the project. That was actually the first time in state history that had ever happened. That's not to say that anything was wrong with the process, but our whole experience with them was a bit of a bumpy one. So we just feel that there aren't real high hopes of them coming back to us right
Of
away.
course, that was before Heather and I got.
Of course. Now everything's different.
In the best case scenario, what would you estimate their share of the burden being?
So best case scenario, we estimate, and I'll get into this, what it would be, but probably only 20 to 25% effective reimbursement rate. At the high school.
There's cities like Lowell and Haverhill and, New Bedford, because of their wealth factor and other reasons that the MSBA looks at, their percentages can be up 60, 65, 70%. But in Concord's case, it would be much, much lower. The high school was 29%.
The high school, right, and there's their official rate, which was 34.5% for the high school, but there are always exclusions. So then you have to look at your effective rate afterwards. We would estimate our effective rate to be 20 to 25 at best. That's probably even aggressive.
And if I may, it may be more of a minor point. The MSBA regulations, such as they are starting to get kind of behind the times. So some of the limitations they impose on new buildings aren't fitting the educational programs that most school systems around the country are trying to move into this 21st century learning. So for example, the limitations on some of the common spaces, creative spaces, auditorium, gyms, and so forth, you're stuck with that. And then if you want to expand beyond that, it isn't as simple as, well, it's all on your nickel. And I'll share briefly the story about the high school. The extra gym at the high school was quite a negotiation. And even then, it didn't meet the square footage of the pre-existing high school, as you know, that had much more square footage. But the MSBA literally said it had to be physically separable, and you could quantify this was your extra amount. But even for that was a huge deal for them. They said, no, we're not enabling towns to spend more than a certain amount, because as the former treasurer came, when he first came out to Concord, his first comment, never forget it was, well, this is Concord, you better not do what Newton did. Because Newton, you may have heard that, $200 million high school, and it sort of set the tone for, what do you think, is every so-called wealthier town going to want to break the bank, or you folks are subsidizing irresponsible spending? So we're dealing with that climate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good point.
So to look at project costs, I'll try to keep this moving because there are a lot of numbers here. We do want to try to estimate what it would look like. We're estimating the building is going to be in a $90 million range. It's hard to know for sure. That might even be conservative, but if you look at the numbers, Average costs right now in middle school construction are about $648 per square foot at a building of about 125,000 square feet. That today would be 81 million. We're looking at escalation over a couple of years. So again, we're estimating somewhere in the $90 million range. For the sake of the rest of the calculations we have to do to make some projections here, we use 90 million as a number. It's our placeholder. We're not promising it's going to be a $90 million building, but we've got to start somewhere in order to really look at what things look like over the next few years. So then you start to look at the cost of waiting, and this is what becomes pretty critical to this discussion. First, you've got just risks, so infrastructure risks. What's highlighted here are simply the things that have already shown failures and are already being patched as we go. Heating lines, like I said, there've been burst pipes here. The roof is actually nearing its end of lifespan. We're patching it for now, but if there's a seam failure, excuse me, then we have some real work to do on it. The septic system is definitely end of life, and we're trying to avoid the cost of replacing it, but at some point we will have to if we don't move out of it soon.
Tell the kids to take care of their socks.
Exactly. Just don't use the toilet.
Bring in porta johns.
Right. Just those things, if we had to replace all of them, would be upwards of $6 million. That's not to say we'll have to replace all of them, and we hope not to, but those are risks that we take every year that we continue to be in the building. And there are other things too that could fail. These are just kind of the most highlighted ones. Then we get into the actual costs of waiting. So actual projected, I should say, but they're likely to be real costs. So we're gonna make a few assumptions here based on one of the biggest questions that we get, which is why not just wait another year and see if we get MSBA funding? It's a very valid question. And for a couple years has been the answer that we came up with, and certainly seemed to make sense. Let's at least try. Let's try to get funding. Why would you not try for, $20 million? So there are a couple of reasons now that we're saying that's not necessarily the way to go. Assumptions here. One of them is that it takes longer to work with MSBA in general than building on your own. So if we wait a year to reapply, and if we get reimbursement, which again, we don't think is likely, but we're gonna say for a second here, if we do, we're 2 years out in terms of our building timeline. So we're now talking about 2 years of escalation costs. Escalation costs from 2010 to 16 were at almost 7%. We've even heard projections that they could go a little bit higher in the next couple of years, but we're gonna be conservative here, and we're using a range of 3 to 7% as our projected escalation costs. 3 is really conservative, probably unlikely, but
There was some between 6 and 9%.
okay, there we go. Can I quote you on
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Yes. So these numbers are conservative. And we've had pushback from finance committee and other people saying these numbers seem too aggressive. We really don't think they are. We think because, sorry?
Where does the 15?
So the 15 million is the cost of the escalation of a $90 million building at 7% escalation over 2 years. You add 15 million
You're
on.
trying to deliver it sooner than the original plan. Is that what you're-
Sorry?
How are you defining escalation costs?
So the escalation cost is, or the way we're using it, what it is how much the general pricing is increasing each year. And so what we're saying
Alright,
is,
thank you.
if we move now, we'll be working with, let's call it, 2020 construction costs. If we wait a year and then take an extra year to get it done, it's 2 years later, so that $90 million building becomes a $105 million building.
Especially if you have to wait for MSBA to chime in and you're waiting for a 2-year period or whatever, you have to factor in more escalation. Whereas
Exactly.
maybe an extra $15 million.
Right.
or more.
So again, we're using between 5 and 15
Right.
to be conservative. We don't want to oversell this. We want to be very fair. So those are conservative numbers. We think it's probably closer to 15, but that's the range. Then there are the operational and maintenance costs. Operation is, again, we're spending over $500,000 a year because of the redundancies. So that's over $1 million over the course of 2 years. Maintenance costs, we're just budgeting in $100,000 a year right now out of our capital expenses just for repairs in both buildings, because we know things are gonna happen. So you add those up and you've got between a little over 6 and 16 million. Then you add in, you know, anywhere up to the 6 million we just talked about as risks, and we're talking 6 to 22 million as your cost of waiting. That's of waiting 1 year to work with MSBA. Now, next we look at what could MSBA give us, again, if they actually came through and funded us. And this is where we work through it, getting to that estimated 20 to 25%. Again, so starting with the 34.5 at the high school, 29% effective, but middle schools tend to have more exclusions, and there are also generally more exclusions from MSBA funding now than there were 5 years ago when the high school was built. So we're estimating 20 to 25%. That may even be high, but that would give us 18 to 22 million. So that right there becomes the reason why we don't wait a year to apply again. Not only is it unlikely, but even if we were to get funding, because of all these escalation costs, most of the benefit that we could get from MSBA is likely to be consumed by that 2 years that we wait. So there's almost no point in trying and waiting again.
So it's hard, 'cause, like, you basically get, if you're getting a set fee or set amount of money from the town to spend, you go to an election, and then if you're waiting a year or two, it's less and less billing you can get each year.
Exactly.
I've
Out
seen
of
that
that.
with some of my clients too. It's like, they waited a year, we go back, and like, sorry. we
That
have
just
to-
doesn't buy you as much
We
anymore.
have to cut like 15-20% of their building down.
Altogether,
And
exactly.
like, this is what you get up. You waited a year, you decided to put the project on hold, you still
Wow.
have the same amount of money, and I mean, we're totally redesigning the building.
Oh my
It's,
gosh.
Sorry, you're just not getting as much. you're not
That's
getting what you asked
painful.
for.
That's
It's-
painful to hear
It's the
about.
worst thing to do, yeah.
And I'm not surprised. I mean, we're talking 90 million. 5 years ago, the high school was a $92 million building. And so that's another one that people kind of get a little sticker shock at. Well, we don't need a middle school that was the same price as the high school. But the high school today,
5 years ago. plus.
right. If you look at the escalation over those years, if we built that high school today, it would be about 152 million. I mean, it's just a different,
As a matter of fact, a
It's
real-life
crazy.
example is Town of Sharon. They're in the feasibility study area of their timeline, and they're now estimating 155 million for a high school, and the student body is within 25 of CCHS.
well, we have.
So it could be configured differently, so I didn't go into those kind of details, but just the idea, you know, if we were building the high school now,
It would
you know.
easily be 100.
it-
Of course,
it'd
the other way
be-
to look at how much did we save by doing the high school we did? We might have saved more had we done it earlier. It's never too late.
Exactly.
Never too early.
Exactly.
Heather, I need to go, but just
Okay.
one last question.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
is our best timeline?
Our best timeline, if we pass the feasibility study and design now, ideally we'll be coming back a year from now to town meeting with a building design and a price tag. You know, so we'll be coming back to town meeting a year from now saying that, you know, here's our 90 million or 95 million, whatever it is, building, asking for funding then. From there, if we get the funding, we move forward and we would hope that, let's see, so that's 2020. We would have some planning, hope to start actual construction in 21 and open by 23.
Okay.
So that's ideal case scenario.
And one important point is that as soon as, when this is passed, there'll be a town building committee formed, and they will do everything from that point on. The high school building committee was 23 members, so there were 5 from the community and, you know, town manager, a couple of school committee members, et cetera, you know. And so it'll be a similar kind of committee that'll be formed by the select board. It'll be a town project. And when it's finished, the school committee and the administration get to use it and pretty much then run it, you know.
And that building committee means opportunities for everyone.
Right.
Exactly.
That's right, that's right.
Well, thank you both.
Thank
Oh, you
you.
bet. Thank you so much
Appreciate
for
it.
coming.
Very helpful. And
I will
need
send
this.
out an email after this, and feel free to follow up with me with any
Okay,
questions.
great. Thanks again.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Okay, so that's reimbursement, tax impact. You want to take over for a
No,
little
that's
bit?
fine. Tax impact is, you know, it's, I mean, you can see the figures there. Average median household tax impact is $764.
Per year.
Per year for about
25 years.
25 years, yeah, right. So
What's the peak year tax rate?
1,015.
No, I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means.
Oh, what is it? Sorry. So basically, when you, over a 25-year term, you can either borrow where you're, I forget what it's called. It's either flatlined or you're going to front load it a little bit.
Yep.
We're likely to front load the way Concord tends to take out a debt service. So in the first couple of years, you're going to have a peak. And then it's going to scale down from there. That's how we've done all of our buildings so far, all the elementary schools and the high school. So the high school debt service right now is still ongoing, but it's declining every year. The elementary schools are actually still being paid off, but they're very low and almost at the end of their hockey stick line there. So peak year would be 1,000. Average over a 25-year term would be 764. But I think the most important thing here is that it's not a choice. We don't have a choice of this 764 or nothing. It's a matter of what are the alternatives, and so then you kind of have to look at.
It seems like there's going to be increase in taxes no matter what.
Exactly.
And this will all be determined by town meeting, by the way. You know, whether it's a 20 or 25-year loan, whether it's a level payment or with a peak, et cetera, et cetera. That's all to be determined. But history is, you know, obviously Heather's correct in terms of the history and how the town has paid for these.
It's level payment would be an even 764 per year. Level principal is what we tend to do, which peaks it early on.
Do you anticipate being the most persuasive counter-arguments to this process?
Counter arguments to passing the millage
Everything
rate?
about this. What do you think people are going to say in terms of throwing mud or throwing something up there? Is it simply the cost? Because I think you can address that. What are the major issues?
There are a couple things. One is purely that it's a tax burden for people and going to push people out of town. And that's a concern that we're hearing about a lot, that people are not going to be able to afford to stay in their homes because this is such a tax burden. That, unfortunately, is a real issue. However, not doing it could make the issue worse. And that's what we're trying to help people to understand. And it's really looking at the next slide that can start to show you that. Because if we don't do it this year, all of a sudden that 764 per year becomes 788 to 825, 8 something. Each year it just gets higher and higher, and that impact is even worse on people. So that is one of the major arguments. We're trying to help people understand that not doing it makes it worse. But that not everybody gets that and has followed all these numbers through all the way to see that. The next piece is that we need to look at this within the context of what needs to be done in town, which is also a very valid point, there's no doubt. There are other needs in town, and there are other buildings that need to be redone. There's talk of improving or redoing the fire station, the public works building, a couple of others. Those are valid projects and probably do need to be done at some point. However, within the context of all of them, these buildings are clearly the most urgent. And it's not just us saying that. The chair of the select board has said that. So of all of them, we do need to plan so that we're not building things all at the same time and hitting a huge debt service all at once. And to me, the answer to that is then we need to get moving on this as quickly as possible, because this is clearly the most urgent. It's the one that's likely to cost us a lot of money if we don't do something soon. And if we want to spread out those building projects, we need to get this one moving quickly so that we can create some space and start on the others.
So those other projects, do you happen to know which ones are most pressing on people's minds?
So it's actually, there's a study that's been going on, and the final result of it has not come out yet, but there is a kind of facilities plan that has yet to be published. So we know the ones that are marked as could need work and of interest. In fact, the finance committee put together a chart of kind of the 5 things that they thought.
And that number, they used 90 million for the middle school, and all the other projects together would mean about 155 million. There were 15 million for Department of Public Works and the fire station, the police station in Concord Center. The fire station in West Concord is probably subpar. And Kaiser Road.
Something in Kaiser,
Yeah. So, and no, additional office space, that's what it was. The
Right.
town needs additional office space, which Peabody,
Right, exactly. So those are, I think those are the two biggest concerns that we've been hearing. Do you think, are there others that
that's true. It's,
you would highlight?
you know, there's a very strong group of people in Concord that are looking to increase affordable housing. And, you know, we have to have 10% in town in order to forego any big developer coming in and building another Muse, which, you know, that's very disruptive from a planning point of view, because there were, you know, like 50 new students coming out of the Muse when that opened, you know, and you know, just to get the teachers and the facilities ready for that kind of an impact is you know, is a very difficult thing.
Well, for the whole town too, there are a lot of supports that agree with something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
The town would much rather plan its own affordable housing that hit a point where all of a sudden anyone can come in and do what they want. And so those are all important things, but we just kind of keep reiterating that this one isn't gonna go away. And we need to get it done as quickly as possible so that we can focus on the
Cost of
others.
waiting thing, this, of course, if I were arguing against it, I'd be like, well, that's assuming that we actually build in the building. It's to
Yes.
say we can't live in this for 15, 20 years and then this is all moot. So is there any type of cost of waiting information that, hey, you may not pay $764 a year, but you're gonna pay 100 next year, 200 the year after. Maybe.
Right, well, and that kind of brings us back to what would it take to stay in the buildings for 10
Exactly.
years,
Yeah.
which was 34 million.
Oh, okay. So why, can we put that?
I think that needs to be like a first slide.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
If you have $50 million, how does that finance over time?
Yeah.
No.
What does that
And
look like?
if, so that, I mean, that cost of waiting, you're right, I could tie that back in at the end of the cost of waiting, but basically that would mean 34 million now, and that was
Right, and that's-
$2017,
That's just
but,
the point we're trying to make.
right, 34 million now, and
Hit
then
people over the head.
build a new building, which will probably be 150
I know
million.
we
by
always
then.
like to save the numbers to the end of the presentation,
Right.
when everybody's asleep, but
Yeah.
when the numbers are the argument for and against this, they need to be front and center, because if somebody says, this is too much money, you say, well, either way, it's a lot of money.
Yeah,
And we have a good solution and a bad solution,
right,
and they're both expensive.
yeah. And the bad solution is more expensive.
And the bad solution just delays it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Yes.
makes it a much more expensive solution, because you have the delay money and then you have the escalation costs.
Exactly.
You can imagine 10 years of escalation if you're trying to post.
Exactly, and we've got to,
Compound interest is.
Yeah, I know.
It's gonna be twice the cost.
and you've got a crazy, right, exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
another argument that's come forward is that, you know, maybe construction costs don't go up 7% per annum
Sure.
within the next 5 years. But, I mean, if you look at 2010 and 11, that was a weak economic period in our country's history, you know? So over those 6 years, they went up 7%.
And even during those down times, the architect knows,
Really?
materials
Yeah.
still went up.
Oh,
A
okay.
lot of labor costs. I mean, you didn't get huge discounts during that tough time. You maybe had greater availability and some breaks, but you could plan for a downturn in 5 years.
Now, see, that's
Yeah, there's-
where I'm coming back to that argument.
That's a bit of a
That
lottery
becomes
ticket to
very
buy right
speculative.
there, yeah.
And that's sort of a similar argument to waiting for the MSBA another year. Well, we're gonna be in the same position we are now in a year from now, when we get rejected. So, you know, there has to be an end point where you decide, you know,
Yeah, and each year you're just bleeding out more money because you're spending and your cost is gonna go up.
I don't want to get you off your presentation.
We're basically done. The only
I
thing left was next
will
steps.
share a story with one of my old timer neighbors, you know, when you go out there and try to spread the faith of why this is the way to go. But it was, you know, the investment model.
Yeah.
And the whole notion of you live in a town where real estate is valuable, even at the so-called lower end. There's nothing that's truly affordable in a general sense. So one of my neighbors who was going on and on back in the elementary schools, he says, I just don't get it, I just don't get it. He said, you know, Bob, you bought your house in the 50s, you put a lot into it. This is America, this is the return on your investment. Now, in his case, it was a little easier because he said, I'll share this with his classic, right? We were thinking we had missed the first vote to fund the 3 elementary schools all at once under the former MSBA program, just to buy only a handful. So it was a great opportunity to get those all done for less money. Now, arguably, maybe not as well built as Willard, but we would have had 3 brand new elementary schools at much less cost. Roughly 30 to 40 million might have been saved. So that vote didn't pass. And I said, Bill, it's a shame we didn't get that because a great investment, here's what's going to happen. So he says to me, he says, Chris, someday if somebody comes up to me and offers me $500,000 for my house, I will have felt I've won the lottery because I'll be in retirement, I'm going to downsize, move out of town, and so forth. This is no joke. Within 1 year later, I said, so Bill, what's going on? He said, put the house in the market. Realtor said, put it on for $550. Went like that. 4-bedroom house, young family moved in. They got the deal relative to what was in Concord. He said, I said, there you go. All those years of taxes you put in, there's the payoff. Okay, what about those who don't want to move? Well, I said to one other neighbor, every generation has sucked it up to make it better. We all do this. And I understand, $700, $1,000, $1,200 per year, but most of us, if you really care, can come up with that if you're living in these houses that are $600,000 and up in real value. And I get it with all these folks, but there's the other part of, well, there's probably a minority who will say, I'm land rich and so cash poor that I can't do this. So I don't want this sort of the majority to say, well, too bad. And then the last one, which one of my realtor friends said is, you want to save money in your taxes, you can't really control the market, except here's what you can do, and towns have done this. You cut back on town services, and educational budget, and you'll see your property values.
And your property values.
And you will start saving taxes.
Yeah.
And so, they may not go down much, but they'll go down enough, and you'll say, is that the kind of community you want to live in?
Right, exactly.
Can maybe get a few more votes that way.
No, it's true. That's part of it. I mean, property value ties into this, town character does. And Concord just did a survey last year about priorities. There is a whole town planning process, and education and town character were 2 of the top priorities, and those 2 tie right in together. It's something that we care about.
In the high school, in the end, not to say that you get that, but it was 85, 86% of Concord and Carlisle voted in favor of it.
Yeah.
It was probably the highest vote we've ever. I think it was the greatest number anybody in town has agreed about anything.
Right.
I think other things it didn't pass by such an amount. I think it surprised the school committee at the time because of the apprehension about the process and the way it went.
Majority required.
That said, so we actually need a 2/3 vote. And I was just going to say, that said, we need to make sure that people who believe in this get out to vote, because the first time the Willard School came up for a vote, it did not pass. And a lot of people said, I just assumed it was going to pass. And education is important in Concord. Doesn't everybody pass it? It didn't pass. They had to come back again a year or maybe 2 later. So this is something that if you believe in, you really need to get to town meeting. You want all the adults in any household to get there. If you have small kids, it's worth getting a babysitter, and it's worth spreading the word. Carpool even. Reach out to friends and neighbors and say, let's carpool, let's go together.
The vote will be in town meeting.
At town meeting is the first vote. So this actually has to pass 2 votes. The first is at town meeting, even for the feasibility and design.
Right.
First is at town meeting, and then assuming that passes by a 2/3 vote, there's a special election about 6 weeks later.
Just for the feasibility?
For any warrant articles that have passed
Wow.
at town meeting that need a vote. So there
the
could be
same
others.
would be true for the 90 million in a year.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So not being an architect, the 1.5 million does sort of stick out as a lot.
It seems a lot because all we can say is it's 3 pieces. It's a feasibility study, which is a detailed study of what you can do on this land to build. And that then informs the schematic design. And the design is, again, it's not the detailed building plan, but it's detailed enough to put a price tag on the building. So it is a building design that we would then move forward with if it passed.
And we probably have figures of the feasibility studies for the high school and elementary elementary schools.
Absolutely.
And
We
some-
have,
and some other schools.
we have
'Cause I-
backup
'cause I
data.
think there were around 1 million high schools in that
not
state.
only that, but current ones
Yeah.
that are going on today.
Right.
How
So
much
it's in
feasibility
line.
studies are. It's absolutely, it's based on the estimates that we've gotten of how much is it going to be to do a feasibility study, how much to get a design done, and how much to hire an OPM, the project manager. And that's what goes into it.
So another statistic why it'll be important to go to town meeting and vote is that it's only 28% of all families in Concord have school-age children. And 4 of those 28% go to private school. I mean, these were figures I got from our town clerk a couple of years ago, so I'm sure they're still pretty relevant. So it's,
So just people use percentages differently. So it's 24% to go to
public schools in Concord, right? Which is, I had tried to guess that, and I would have said 35-40%.
Mhm.
You know, so it's not a
It's only a
really
quarter.
big number, you know. So there are a lot of people out there that, you know, aren't in that category, and they're gonna have different priorities and different ways of, you know, looking at this information, and so it's important that everybody show up.
Need a documentary on Netflix, which is so horrible, these buildings.
Exactly.
Show them the staircase that goes nowhere.
Exactly.
So this is a 55-year-old building
Mhm.
or thereabouts.
Yep.
How, is there anything of comparable age in Concord or the surrounding area educational facility that's still going?
That's a good question.
In Concord, no, these two are the last
Yeah.
2 buildings that are this old and still going. There's, I don't know offhand the buildings in the surrounding areas, but
Some of
there, there,
some of the active buildings go back.
there are
about-
certainly others. I could certainly look it up. MSBA did a survey 2 years ago in 2016 of all the school buildings in the state. And you can look through it, and there are actually a lot of schools that are now getting into the 50-year range. So there are a bunch of others out there. In a way, that's part of the problem right now, because they're all hitting end of life at the same time. So a lot of districts are applying for,
I can tell you Boston
Funding.
Public is a lot worse.
yeah,
We were in Charlestown before moving here, which is why we moved
okay,
here. It's a disaster.
yeah.
But some of these old brick buildings, I mean, they last a long time.
Well, some of them, you know, somebody the
Schools
other
70,
day,
80, 90 years old.
somebody the other day pointed out a school that was 100 years old.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
said, you know, in a way, given what construction was like, I'd almost, I'm not sure if I should be quoted on this, but almost rather be in a 100-year-old school, because the construction processes there were just more long-lasting, right? You could be in a 100-year-old house in Concord.
Stuff that was
Right.
built
It's
thinking 100 years.
Exactly.
And a lot of stuff in the 50s and 60s was built as short-term baby boom.
There you go.
Right.
Slap-on grade. The high school is a perfect example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
New
exactly.
England is filled with these slap-on grade stuff. It says, let's tie us over for the next 5 to 10 years, ha ha.
Right. And
40
50
years later,
yeah.
we're stuck with what was considered a temporary solution in the 50s, dealing with the baby boom.
Yeah.
So we've kind of been bred into this notion of a short term, and now we're getting back to something to say, this is 50 plus years,
Right.
and 40, 50 years from now, you can take this infrastructure of the high school and probably upgrade it as opposed to necessarily level it.
Yeah.
And that may be another point to say to folks, well, in 50 years now, we're going to level that brand new building and start over like this. The answer is probably not. if we
Probably
do it
not,
right.
yeah. In fact, when we talk about design concepts and thinking, the biggest word that comes up is flexibility. And it's a matter of both flexibility on a day-to-day standpoint and how the teachers can teach, but also in terms of building and being able to use the building in various ways over the long term so that we don't have to just scrap it and start over again at some point in the near future. So I think I've gone through all this, only leaving the next step is make sure you get out to town meeting, spread the word.
You'll send us a follow-up email?
But yes, I will send all of you a follow-up email. I can include these slides as well as I have basically an info sheet. It just kind of summarizes all of this in 2 pages. So I can send that also. But are there before we wrap up, any other questions?
Are they worried about the walls falling in 8 years? Are they worried?
In these buildings?
Yeah.
From a safety perspective now, no, we've done everything that we feel that we need to do to make sure it's safe for kids in the buildings right now. I have a kid in each building right now. That said, what are they worried about in terms of failures? It's things like the piping systems, the septic. You know, if pipes start to go at Peabody, we literally have to be digging into concrete to get them out. I think the biggest concern is if things fail and the remediation and the protection of the asbestos and mercury and PCBs and that kind of stuff becomes an issue. Relocation is a huge question. If all of a sudden something fails here and we can't address it without digging into asbestos, we have to relocate 400 kids. And that's going to be a huge cost.
Plus the
And
fact
we-
there's no sprinklers in here too, right?
No sprinklers in
Yeah,
here.
it's a
Exactly.
disaster too, to have to relocate everybody,
Exactly.
you know, in an event, because it'd be a more catastrophic failure if anything did happen.
Right. So there are a lot of things, you know, we're not worried about the safety of kids on a day-to-day basis, but we are absolutely worried about the long term of things could fail and we could end up in a situation that's extremely costly.
Money.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Sure, anything else? All right, so I'm working on it. I will follow up and feel free to be in touch with me.
April 8th, right?
April 8th, Monday night. Get your
All right.
sitters, carpool with friends.
April 14 it looks like.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks.